Hi, this is Noelle Dunphy. Today we are here with Commissioner Bill Bratton, former NYPD Commissioner. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to be with you.
Today we're talking about your new book, The Profession, a memoir of policing in America. One of the things I noticed in your book was a quote from Al Sharpton. You need to have people who understand that the law is what they protect and uphold. They're not above the law. And you also went into the fact that, there were trying to get attention away from the good things that the police department was doing in New York, and that there's always controversy over how the police can best keep people safe.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, the comment that Sharpton made, interestingly enough, that is a very good comment. What he was basically saying is that we have an expression in policing: you cannot break the law to enforce the law. So what Sharpton was talking about was just that the idea that police, to be respected, to be responded to, we take an oath of office to uphold the law, and you cannot tolerate an officer breaking the law to enforce it. And so that's what that comment from Sharpton was referencing, the belief that, particularly in the part of a lot of minorities, that too many police break the law while enforcing it, that they don't enforce it fairly. And that's felt by many minorities, that the police police differently in a minority neighborhood than they do in a white neighborhood or a rich neighborhood. And that's something police have to work very hard to correct that perception of that belief.
Well, I think in any industry there are good people and there are bad people, whether it's priests, teachers, police officers, and it's a constant struggle to keep the image of any agency or organization as a positive image. I think all the good police officers who are trying their best to keep the city safe don't always get the credit
The vast
they deserve.
majority of them are good people. Do they make mistakes from time to time? Certainly. Some of those are unintended.
Some bad seeds are in any group, right?
Exactly. And we work very hard to, one, keep them out of the profession. Most police departments have very tough selection processes, and those processes have gotten stricter over the years: lie detector tests, psychological screening, background checks. And we also, I think, are getting much better, particularly in the era of computers and the digital world we live in, of being able to identify police officers who shouldn't be in the police department, that they are brutal, they might be racist, they might be incompetent, they may be criminals. And we do a much better job now of finding them than we did years ago. And we're much less tolerant of that behavior.
And on the flip side, you quoted some rioters in your book who at one point were chanting, "What do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them? Now." And reactions like that, or maybe an overreaction to an isolated incident, or even years of incidents of police brutality that are hopefully isolated incidents, sometimes do lead to this kind of overreaction where people then think we need to completely defund the police, or these rioters were actually advocating for, it sounded like, murdering the police, which obviously is using mayhem and violence to achieve a goal of nonviolence. The irony.
What you're describing, and we can use the George Floyd murder as a context for what you're describing. Certainly after his death, that there were tremendous demonstrations around the country. Some of the chants were what you've described, that in terms of very negative toward the police. And it's just a reflection of how difficult the police job is for officers to have to be standing on a line and have that type of invective thrown at them, or worse, to have physical objects thrown at them, and that to not respond in a negative way. And the irony is that oftentimes when police have to deal with a situation, somebody that's resisting arrest, for example, they have to use force. And very often the force they're using is lawful, but it looks awful. You know, anytime you see people wrestling with each other, particularly 2 cops or 3 cops or 4 cops.
Or tasering someone.
It takes that many people to get control of somebody, particularly somebody who doesn't want to be arrested or is resistant. It looks awful. And we talk about this in the book, that in today's era where we now have everybody with a camera, a movie camera basically, that what you get are 2 things. You'll get snippets of what actually happened because people start photographing after something has started.
Right.
So
you might miss the instigating behavior for policemen to attack.
And that oftentimes you might also get the end. So they're able to basically put out, if they're supportive of the police.
Something out of context.
Out of
a
context
clip.
is basically the way to do it. And then the second aspect of the age we live in is the ability to push that out through social media. So it's played hundreds of thousands, or in the case of George Floyd's death, millions of times. And the redundancy of it, the capability to take what is a minor incident, some instances just police use of force that's authorized or justified, but it looks awful. So when it comes out in social media, it's happening in some small town in Iowa, someplace where it normally would not make the news, but now it's all over the internet. So it's a very different world today than it was when I first came into policing in the 1970s, when you got your news through 3 television stations, a couple of newspapers, and radio. That was it.
Very different.
Very, very different world.
That brings us to the topic of leadership. How do you define leadership, and what do you respect and admire most in a leader?
Leadership has many definitions. God knows there's a lot of books about leadership. All of my books have elements of leadership examples in them. I think of myself as a leader, and I think of myself as a leader
absolutely.
because I think I have some of the characteristics that I would associate with what I believe are leaders. I believe I have vision for my profession. I believe that I have the ability to inspire, to get others to embrace my ideas. I believe as a leader, I am open to the ideas of others, so that I'm inclusive rather than exclusive. And I think most successful leaders are those that are able to surround themselves with smart people, oftentimes smarter than themselves, and find a mechanism that they can share those ideas with them. And leadership also requires courage, sometimes physical, but sometimes just courage to do the right thing.
Yes.
That, against great odds, against the demand that something be done that you don't think is the right thing, to stand up for your principles, that leaders need to be principled.
Yes.
So I think in my career I've had a good number of opportunities to exhibit leadership, and again, I write about them in the book, I write about it in the profession, and I don't necessarily believe that leaders are born. I think oftentimes they're created. That there's a quote I use from time to time in my speeches. I'm not sure who made the initial quote, but something that goes to the effect of, there are no great men, there are only ordinary men who in response to great crises do extraordinary things. And in some respects you have leadership exhibited in the midst of crises. Somebody who is just, you don't think of as a leader in a normal day-to-day circumstances. In a crisis, all of a sudden he rises to the top and exhibits things that you never thought of him, whether it's courage, whether it's physical courage, mental acumen, ideas and thoughts. So leadership, you'd actually have a hard time defining it, because there's so many different ideas about what it means.
Well, one mayor you worked with, Rudy Giuliani, titled his book Leadership. On that topic, how would you describe working under Mayor Giuliani and seeing him inspire people after 9/11, and then bring us to today, and some of the changes you've seen in how he handled himself under President Trump, if you will.
In my 50-year career, I've worked for a lot of mayors, a number of governors. I've worked for several authorities. So I worked for the president of the MBTA police, for example, in Boston. Giuliani, I worked with in 1994 to 1996. I was his first police commissioner, the first term of office he was elected for mayor. He was quite clearly then as mayor, and then certainly after the events of 9/11, what you would describe as a leader, somebody who effectively was able to, in a sense, out of chaos, try to bring some sense of order and normalcy, and he was widely credited, appropriately credited, for his actions on 9/11. He had the title for the longest time, America's Mayor. He was an interesting person to work for because he was smart, he was hardworking, he was in those days very principled, and he was very successful. That he had campaigned on the idea he would do something about crime. We were able to do a lot about crime and disorder, and he's widely credited with being the catalyst for the so-called New York miracle turnaround of the 90s. That the city, up until about 2018, every year just got safer and safer. But there's no denying that he was a principal catalyst for that turnaround in the 90s. In terms of his work with former President Trump now, it's hard to explain. That it seems that he's a very different person than he was back then, where he's literally worked as a mayor. He was working for himself. He was the boss. He was the top guy. He didn't report to anybody except the voters. So the idea or the irony that somebody who likes being in charge and somebody who was very good at being in charge by and large now finds himself working for somebody else. And working for somebody else who for a large part of the country is very unpopular. And the issues that he's working on are very unpopular. So the popularity of the mayor by all accounts has declined dramatically, and where it's all going to end up, who knows, that with the various investigations, some trials possibly, but there's no denying that he's in a very different place now than he was in 2001. It was recently before the election of Mr. Trump that he was in a very good place. He had a very successful company. Unfortunately for him, which oftentimes happens to public figures, his public life was a mess, in the sense of the marriages, etc. So anything involving that was so in the public. As recently as the past week, they've been court battling over some assets, him and his former wife. So that's always one of the frustrations for public officials, that you really don't have a private life. There's nothing in your life that's private.
Yes. I noticed in your book you did get into some insight into working closely with him, calling Rudy Giuliani the best of all the mayors I have worked with in terms of compassion and the ability to deal with grieving families. And you started the sentence with ironically, because you elaborated too. I used to marvel at how a man who could be so cold and distant and downright nasty would summon the compassion needed to comfort those in desperate pain, which is ironic.
That was a skill he had, and it was not made up. It was, this is the complexity of Rudy Giuliani, that he had this incredible capacity for empathy, for grief, and to deal and comfort people. And there's not a mayor in America that's ever had to do it more than he had to do. He attended the funeral of every one of those 300 some odd police firefighters, dealt with each of their families, and even his comment after 9/11 occurred that maybe the grief is more than we'll be able to endure. That was reflective of just him recognizing how much grief was going to come out of that tragedy. So the one thing you cannot diminish in terms of many who dislike him is that quality, that it was not put on. It was genuine. I've been in too many hospital situations to not see that it was genuine. It wasn't just, he basically puts on the tears and turns around and puts on the anger. So it's something that, again, working with a number of mayors at the deaths of police officers or injuries, you get to see them. Some are just incredibly uncomfortable with it and don't know how to deal with it well. And but in his case, I commented, I think one time, maybe it's because he loves opera so much, and that opera is all about death and tragedy. That, you know, in terms of some of the greatest operas are all about somebody dying and the grief over it. And some of the greatest arias are about, they're basically death songs. So it's maybe it's just a reflection of that of his personality, that he's a tremendous opera fan.
Well, compassion is certainly a positive quality in a leader or in anyone. But then the flip side, being a loose cannon, he has that reputation now. But even when he first ran for mayor, in one of the speeches Rudy made recently, he referred back to when he lost the mayoral race the first time he ran, and he claimed it was due to voter fraud. And then in a very public court case, he argued voter fraud on behalf of President Trump, or most recently, former President Trump. I'm wondering your thoughts on that, if he did seem like such a volatile personality, even back then, and what you think of the voter fraud idea.
There's no denying, because he's written about it himself in the various biographies that he's participated in, that he deeply believes that that first election with David Dinkins, that there was voter fraud. None of it ever proven that I'm aware of, but it's a matter of indifference because he believed it. And even after being elected mayor, he was very concerned about attempts to engage in voter fraud, and so put a lot of safeguards in place during that first election, not a second election actually, that he won. It is interesting that he is so passionate in helping to create the initiatives for former President Trump around the issue of voter fraud. And it might just be a manifestation that he himself deeply believed that he was the victim of it. And so that there's an empathy for President Trump in what the mayor feels was some form of voter fraud. Who knows that, again, all the investigations that have been conducted has not disclosed anything that would have swayed an election. But again, we all have different beliefs. In the case of Mr. Trump and Mayor Giuliani, they clearly believe, since they've advocated so strongly for it, that there was voter fraud. It's not been identified anywhere that I'm aware of, but you know, history tends to evolve. We'll have to see what happens in years ahead.
And what about the dramatic rhetoric of his famous statement on January 6th in D.C. when he said, "Let's have trial by combat"? For him and Trump to make such dramatic statements, even if they were metaphorical rather than literal, even if they weren't actively trying to incite a riot or violence or vandalism, which did ensue, giving them that benefit of the doubt that it wasn't their intent to cause violence. As a leader, do you find it is more prudent to sometimes be less divisive, more calm or politically correct, if you will, versus creating a media frenzy and maybe getting extra attention on the news, but risking upsetting people to such a degree, the way that at least half of America has become very emotional as a reaction to what occurred January 6th?
This goes back to the earlier comment about leadership, that different styles of leadership. There's no denying that Trump and those around him in the run-up to January 6th and on January 6th were exerting a form of leadership that is now the subject of great discussion, debate, and investigation as to what was the intent. Was it rhetorical or was it intended? That's not for me to judge, basically, because there's so many investigations trying to determine what was it. And even those who have opinions, until it is resolved, was it in fact a violation of the law, wasn't intentional. That's the subject of the great debate that the country's engaged in at the moment. But it is reflective of leadership that, in the heart and soul of the conversation we're having, that leadership manifests itself in so many different ways, and for good and bad.
I think it would be hard to disagree with you on that. Ironically, before being known as an expert on cybersecurity and running a company that does safety and security all over the world, Rudy Giuliani, as quoted in your book, Giuliani in 94 to 1995 refused to accede to union demands and faced the catcall, "Zeros for Heroes." Could you speak a bit about what exactly that meant, that phrase that people chanted at the mayor and probably at you as police commissioner, probably unfairly, saying "Zeros for Heroes"? What exactly did that mean?
During his first term, the city, as is so often the case, was in a significant budget crisis, and in the negotiations with the various unions, they were very strict in not giving pay raises and benefits more than they felt the city could afford. The police union, and myself as police commissioner for that matter, really felt that by 1996, because they had turned crime around by so much, and it was going to continue to go down, that the union was arguing that, look, we delivered for you and the citizens, we made the city a much safer place. So we feel that we should be compensated. And there's a structure in New York City of parity that police, fire, corrections officers all actually paid the same amount of money, but how you get to their total benefits, some of it's salaries, some of it's benefits. But in any event, the city will try to not give any union more than the other union, parity. And how they get around that, the unions control extraordinary funds and benefits. So the unions will sometimes be able to negotiate that their members get a percentage point higher than somebody else because they're giving back money to the city in some shape or form. So what was going on with Giuliani at that time? He was trying to maintain that parity that the city has historically done with the fire and sanitation and corrections. And the cops were very unhappy and came up with the term you're talking about, "Zeros for Heroes."
The police came up with that term?
Yeah, the police union came up with
that
the
term. Police union, right.
Yeah. The idea of denigrating the pay raises that Giuliani was offering. And the city was effectively very short on cash. And I'll give you an example. That there were several firefighters killed in that period, 94, 95. And it was felt that their deaths were contributing to their deaths with the equipment that they were wearing, the coats and raincoats instead of they wear, and that there were new types of jackets. I forget the term the fire department uses for those coats that they wear, and they're fire retardant, fire resistant. But to equip them, it's going to cost $10 million, and the unions were, understandably, after the death of some of their firefighters, demanding the city buy this safety gear for us. It's very much like when the police had to buy bulletproof vests, so we moved to 9mm weapons to improve the safety of officers. Well, Giuliani, looking around, there was literally no money in the budget to come up with $10 million immediately, except one place. And that one place was, ironically, the police department, because we had done such a good job controlling the overtime budget in the police department that for the first time in modern times, we were under budget. We were not spending the money we had been budgeted for. And ironically, that amount was $10 million. So they transferred the money from the police department to the fire department to pay for those coats that they wear, jackets. A lot of the cops were not happy about that because they felt that money should have gone to them to help support the pay raises. Giuliani made the right decision. I think that he was concerned with the safety of the firefighters, so he made that decision. But in dealing with unions, one of the most difficult assignments for a leader in the public sector, with a police commissioner or mayor, is dealing with unions and their demands. And for example, when de Blasio came in as mayor in 2014, Mayor Bloomberg, because of the budget crises he was facing in his last term, all of the contracts were open. They had not settled any union contract with any union in the city for a couple of years. So de Blasio's coming in with this potential for a huge budget deficit because they're going to have to give pay raises. And that's just an example of effectively what mayors wrestle with, and sometimes successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully.
Interestingly, I was just sitting next to a gentleman who is general counsel for Con Ed, and he was remarking to me how difficult it was for Con Ed to negotiate with certain mayors who came from a political or government background, like Mayor Giuliani, and he was saying it was so refreshing to negotiate with Mayor Bloomberg, who, from a businessman's perspective, saw that Con Ed doesn't need to be alienated from New York City, and that the deals that they could work out should be win-win.
Well, think of that comment. Giuliani, not a politician, a career law enforcement official.
Or law enforcement.
Bloomberg, certainly a career successful business person, never a politician. De Blasio, never anything but a politician. Same for Dave Dinkins. So their backgrounds basically shape some of how they governed. That, in terms of Bloomberg coming certainly from an environment in the business world where, he was a billionaire, and basically you could say somebody jump and they're going to say how high. It doesn't work that way in the public sector. So the frustration of having to negotiate much more significantly for him. Giuliani, similarly, with the great power of the Justice Department behind him when he was investigating Wall Street, for example, coming in as mayor, didn't quite have that same power. That it still required negotiations, and because he wasn't dealing with criminals, he was basically dealing with, presidents of unions, etc. So sometimes the backgrounds of mayors influence how they govern. Different styles of leadership, once again.
Inevitably. Do you remember the privatization of off-track betting? I read a lot about it, but I'm not sure if you were involved in that at all.
That was already in place when I got here. They used to have they still have them off-track betting rooms where all these characters would hang out and bet on the horses and stuff. I don't have much familiarity with it, never being a gambler. I'm not sure now with all of the ability to gamble, that you gamble on your phone there. That you see the advertisements in the evening news about put $5 down and we'll give you $500 to play. So I'm just...
Yes, online gambling apps. But I remember it was under Mayor Giuliani they took off-track betting from being public, and it was the largest privatization in New York City. And interestingly enough, it's still there, just maybe not as popular due to online things. But that may not have been the years you were working with Mayor Giuliani. And then, did you want to take a minute to discuss Mayor Bloomberg? Any last thoughts you want to leave us with about Mayor Bloomberg and his leadership?
I very much envy Commissioner Kelly the 12 years he got to work for Mayor Bloomberg. I had come to know Bloomberg after my first term. As police commissioner, we would get out to lunch from time to time. He wanted to talk about how crime had been turned around, and little did I know at that time that I think he was even back then in the 90s thinking of running for mayor. And so he was reaching out to people to start formulating his thoughts about running for mayor, which he subsequently did after 9/11 and won, and then the city had it for 12 years. I think the city benefited from his 12 years. I like Mayor Bloomberg, and I think his 12 years in office were by and large good years for the mayor. There'd be a lot of other people who would disagree, but whoever has more than 60 or 70% favorability, nobody for very long.
What are your thoughts about Commissioner Ray Kelly?
Ray and I it's ironic that it's almost like we play checkers, that I've come in behind him twice now. And I think both of us have been very successful in what we were asked to do, the reduction of crime, reduction of disorder. But we have very different management styles, leadership styles.
How so?
He is up through the ranks of the NYPD. I came in from the outside. So basically, in terms of, he had experiences, extraordinary military career at Vietnam. He was in Vietnam, I think as a major, possibly. I was in Vietnam as a private. But he, so even during the Vietnam era, he was in a leadership role there. And like Bloomberg, his 12 years, with the exception of the whole stop, question, frisk controversy, were pretty successful. They dealt with strict budget cuts. They kept crime going down by and large. What is not widely known and appreciated is because of those budget cuts that Bloomberg was having to make, the police department lost over 6,000 officers during that time, but crime still went down. So the department ended up going back down to the size when it was before David Dinkins began his Safe Streets initiative, where he hired up 6,000 officers. So Kelly, ironically, working under Dinkins in the hiring of those 6,000, working under Bloomberg, he had to let them go.
And with fewer resources, fewer police officers, they had less crime. It was the way they ran it, the efficiency, right, the effectiveness
unfortunately, that
of
created
the
the
department.
stop, question, and frisk controversy because the officers were being pushed to do more of that activity because it was believed with more of that there'd be less crime. So there's an area that we had a strong difference of opinion around stop, question, and frisk. But there's no denying that he was very popular as police commissioner. Bloomberg certainly had a lot of trust in him, kept him for the whole 12 years. And the two of them together kept the city very safe for that period of time.
What are your thoughts about Bernie Carrick?
Bernie, unfortunately, who I know pretty well, his actions were really inexcusable in the sense the abuse of the powers of being police commissioner, and that no denying that working with Giuliani, he was very involved in the post 9/11 recovery efforts, but just many of the stories about his behavior, his activities, and what he got sentenced to jail for. So, he's unique among New York City police commissioners in that he's a convicted felon, which is, sad for him that because he had a meteoric rise from second grade detective to police commissioner. Giuliani certainly had a lot of confidence in him. And ironically, during his time, despite coming to a very high position from a very low position, if I recall, during his time, crime also went down. He was only commissioner for about a year and a half or 2 years. He actually left shortly after 9/11. But I think during his time, crime also continued to go down. But he'll forever wear the mantle of being the police commissioner that was a convicted felon. And no police commissioner wants to wear that mantle, that's for sure.
And being in a correctional facility that was named after him in honor of him since
before he went there. Well, there was an irony to that during his time in working with his predecessor, Rikers, which had a much larger jail population, was a much safer place. There was much less crime, much fewer victims. And I think there's 14 different deaths in Rikers so far this year. That's extraordinary with a population of 5,000 people in that jail. Extraordinary. But Carrick, by all accounts, was pretty successful as corrections commissioner, which allowed Giuliani to give a platform to stand on that he was making the corrections commissioner into his police commissioner.
And then when Mayor Giuliani ran for president of the United States in 2008 for the Republican primary, he was bringing Bernie Carrick in on his in his inner circle, I believe,
Yeah, I don't
to
know
be
if
up for a secretary of the treasury.
And went to jail. I know what
It was right around then because that's when they investigated him.
Because I don't know that Rudy would have used him.
When Mayor Giuliani ran for president, Bernie had not yet been investigated.
So that would have been after that.
And that's when they looked into everyone with more scrutiny for now a cabinet position.
It's somewhat remarkable that he's been able to ingratiate himself through Mayor Giuliani with President Trump to the extent. I think President Trump actually gave him a pardon, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
He did. I remember, as someone who has worked closely with Mayor Giuliani and who knows Bernie Kerik, I noticed the lack of loyalty from Mayor Giuliani toward former Commissioner Kerik. When he was released from jail, he was never again hired or given any public association with Mayor Giuliani, who I asked, why don't you sort of have any loyalty to this person who used to work under you and would have done anything for you, would have died for you. He almost did die for you. And now that he is out of jail and trying his best to get a job with you again, why don't you give him a chance? And he just never would forgive him for embarrassing him when he was running for president.
I can't comment on that because I have no knowledge of their relationship since that time. That's nothing I paid much attention
It's just remarkable to me. What did you think when Mayor Giuliani ran for president? Did you support him at that time in 2007, 2008?
No, but he had come to visit me. I write about that in my book that when he was running for president, when he was actually leading candidate at that time, he had come to visit me in LA. I was chief of police in Los Angeles at that time too. He was there campaigning, and he came by for a courtesy call to let me know that he was, planning to run for president. I think there was concern on his part because of the bad blood that had existed between us after my time with him, that I would end up not campaigning against him, but not say good things about him during the presidential campaign. But it never came to that in any event because, well, he never, unfortunately, got to first base. He just he literally struck out at home plate in terms of his run for. And there's another irony that of all the candidates, he probably had some of the best name recognition in that time. That for the events of 9/11, he was still America's mayor at that time, but he never caught on. That it was really fascinating. He had a huge war chest that he had put together. Might have been the fact that there were just so many other candidates running against him.
John McCain, who ultimately won the nomination, although lost to President Obama ultimately. And then that really gave Trump the platform on which to rise by saying that President Obama is born in Kenya, not a real American. We need a real American like Donald Trump, as he referred to himself. So going back to your experience and you as a leader, do you want to end the interview by speaking for a minute or two or telling us a story about working with the Department of Homeland Security?
The Department of Homeland Security, which was formed after 9/11, I remember being in the White House, that I was the chief of the Los Angeles Police Department at that time, and they were creating the Department of Homeland Security, and Governor Ridge was the first person, I think the first Secretary of Homeland Security, Governor Ridge from Pennsylvania, I think, and meeting him. And then his successor, when Clinton came in 2000, not Clinton, when did Obama get elected?
2008.
2008. I was leaving the Los Angeles Police Department as chief, coming back here to New York to work in the private sector, and I was approached to join the Homeland Security Advisory Council, which are 32 people that are on a committee that advise the Homeland Security Secretary, and I was asked to join, her name escapes me for the moment, the first woman, why am I lacking her name? But she during her tenure, she was appointed by Obama. And what that committee does, they do
What was her title?
she was the Secretary of Homeland Security. And so we've had a number of Secretaries of Homeland Security. Jay Johnson, the one I was closest to. And in that role, what you do is you are asked to do certain assignments by the Secretary on issues of importance to him: border control, immigration. We did an investigation of the Customs and Border Patrol use of force. And I was appointed vice chairman of that committee, working for the chairman, who was Bill Webster, the former head of the FBI and CIA, extraordinary gentleman. So I had the good fortune for a number of years of serving with him. And then recently, when he stepped down, I was appointed briefly as chairman of the committee. And then more recently, they have divided the chairman up to, there are two of us now, that we're both vice chairman. And that's because of the complexity of the assignment. So it's a committee I'm proud to serve on because it looks at all these issues around the country: terrorism, cybersecurity, immigration issues, even the Ukrainian war, a lot of what to deal with relative to that. So it's an unpaid position. You know, it's your point, you're not paid for it. A lot of your meetings are done virtually. You don't have to go to Washington for them. With the advent of Zoom, it makes communications a lot easier. I'm very proud to be serving on that committee now for about 13 years. So
Congratulations again on all of your success in your career and on both your books, Turnaround and The Profession.
The other one is Collaborate Perish. I got that around here somewhere. Up there.
Where is the third
Yeah,
book?
that's right there.
Collaborate or Perish.
That was
Reaching around
co-authored.
boundaries in a networked world.
The co-author there is Zach Tuman. Zach Tuman was a colleague who for many years wrote case studies at the Kennedy School. And the case studies, basically the book is filled about 24 case studies on successes and failures, where collaboration was key to success and collaboration, lack of, was key to the failure. So the three books, I feel very proud of those three books because they encompass a 50-year lifetime, kind of legacy items, the idea of trying to share with people my thoughts about what works, what doesn't work. Kind of what doing this interview with you, the idea of sharing my thoughts about successful leaders, others who've not been so successful. Some of your questions about what are the traits of a leader. So I like I give a lot of speeches on that issue around the country, and do a lot of television and radio interviews also. And it keeps me relevant in the sense that to do those interviews successfully, I really have to know what I'm talking about, or at least be able to support my opinion when I'm giving it, when I'm talking about something. And it's I always try to be informed when I'm giving my opinion. I don't want to just pick something out of thin air and throw it out there. So I want to balance it.
Commissioner Bratton, thank you for your time. I have so much respect for you as a leader, as a man, as a person, and thank you for all you've done for our country.
A pleasure talking with you. Thank you. And good luck with your piece.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Let me turn off the recorder first.